You know, at the end of your life, it won't matter as much what you did as much as who you were. Hi, I'm Pastor Bill with your Maple Minute for this Thursday, July 23rd, 2020. You know, we've been looking at the story of our life that's written not in ink, but is written with the various elements of our life. And we said there are three great determining factors that help us write this story. A story that's going to live on well beyond our lives, into time that people, friends, family, and generations to come will see our lives and will evaluate who we were based upon these things. We started off talking about the first aspect, and if you hadn't been here, I would encourage you to go back and listen to them. But the first aspect we said, and just to sum it up, was the fact that the people you know determine the story you tell. The people you're hanging out with, they're going to help. The people you hang out with today are shaping the person you'll become tomorrow. And we use the life of David and the friends that he had that helped shape him, and that was an important aspect. The second one that we discussed in the last episode is about choices, because we said the decisions you make today determine the stories you will tell about your life tomorrow. And that's so true, and decisions do shape us. And we talked about the great example that Daniel was, and how Daniel's small choices, and it is the small choices that make the person that we become. Today we're going to finish it up, and we're going to wrap up by talking about the third aspect. And it really is not just about friends, it's not just about choices, but it's about challenges. See, the way you respond to challenges determines the stories we will tell. And that's so important, that's so true, because your decision to trust in God in life's difficulties may be one of the biggest ongoing choices that you'll ever going to make. And that is probably one of the most true statements I can ever make. And every one of us are going through choices and challenges. I think back through all the things we've gone through just in the year of 2020, and we're only about a little over halfway through, and we've gone through a lot of things. And some people have gone through more than others. Some of you have had to bury loved ones through this COVID time. Some of you have watched friends get sick. You've seen illnesses mentally of people who've been isolated. You've seen people lose their jobs and lose hope. You've seen friends walk away, and you've just been discouraged and defeated. And these challenges are helping write the story of your life. But it's not just the challenges themselves, it's how you respond to these challenges, these opportunities, as we could say. See, once again, your decision to trust God in life's difficulties could be one of the best ongoing choices you ever get to make. And I know that because in the Bible, the author of Hebrews, he discusses this at length about the fact that there are trials and troubles that were going on during the time period of his writing. He writes to these first century Hebrew believers in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 32. He says, remember those earlier days after you had received the light, and he's talking about them becoming Christ followers, how it wasn't easy. Their decision to follow Christ had caused some problems. He says, when you endured in a great conflict of suffering, and that's one of those challenges of life, a great conflict of suffering. Goes on the next verse, it says, sometimes you were publicly, in case you didn't know what he was talking about, sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. And he says, man, it was just all the time. Life wasn't always easy. In verse 34, he says, you suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. You knew really what the story that you were writing wanted to be. And that's the whole idea. It was worth it, is what the author of Hebrews is telling you. See, in that first century, being a Christian, in fact, the term Christian was a derogatory term. We use it as a badge of honor these days, but it really wasn't back then. It had come about as a term for those that were hated by the culture. And it was a term that the disciples, the true followers of Christ, had endeared themselves to, not through going forward in church and having a right hand of fellowship exerted to them. They were given the opportunity to earn that title through suffering, through challenges, through things, if you go on to read the chapter 11, through the things that the Bible talks about that are so tough to go through. And that is such an important thing. And today, if you were going to take just a second and think about a person that characterized this, it probably is going to be an obscure person that you probably don't know much about, other than one fact. It's a guy who was a disciple, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, a guy named Thomas. Thomas, another name for him was Didymus. He was the twin. And we know him best because he is known as Doubting Thomas. But that's just a small part of the story that he wrote in his life. And it's sad but true. It held that many Christians sort of label him as the doubting one. But I want you to know, Thomas was a very faithful disciple. See, after Jesus Christ had died on the cross, I think that was the greatest defeat that the Christians had at that time, those who were disciples of Jesus. But then he rose again from the dead, and Thomas wasn't there on that first gathering. By the way, that's just a side note for those of you that might think about skipping out on church. Hey, Thomas missed an important meeting where Jesus first came. And so when they tried to convince Thomas that they had seen the risen Lord, Thomas said, "Not until I touch his nail prints in his hands and the spear mark in his side will I believe." And so Thomas wanted proof. That was his idea. And so he was forever labeled this doubting Thomas. But I want you to know Jesus gave Thomas exactly what he needed to believe there in John chapter 20 and verse 27. But I want you to know doubting Thomas really isn't Thomas's story. It's a small part of the transformation that he made because he rose in the midst of challenges. See, Thomas was so convinced that Jesus had risen, that he left his comfortable surroundings of his home, the people that he knew, his family, and he traveled all the way, as history tells us, to India to tell people about Jesus. He was an evangelist missionary. That's what he did. And I know he doesn't get the claim that of fame that Paul gets as being the great missionary of the church because he didn't write the scripture. But Thomas, once again, he wasn't as much a doubter as we think. In fact, I think in my own life, the greatest proof that Jesus Christ was real is the fact that people like Thomas, who really did doubt, followed through and gave their whole lives to go and spread the gospel to places like India. Thomas was so convinced that Jesus had risen that not only did he leave his comfortable surroundings and he traveled to India, he became known as the first evangelist to take the gospel to this part of the world and to share it very boldly. But it wasn't received well, and that's the rest of the story about Thomas. As Paul Hurry would say, page 2, we would find out that when the opponents of Christ threatened Thomas's life, if he didn't renounce his faith, Thomas stood firm. He no longer doubted that which he didn't see. He trusted in God as his Savior and his Lord most of all. And as a result, those Christ haters, as the Book of Martyrs would tell us, drove a spear through his body and turned him into a faithful martyr of the gospel of Jesus Christ. See, doubting Thomas had transformed his life by rising to the challenge that determined the rest of his story. Doubting Thomas is no longer doubting Thomas. We could call him now trusting Thomas. And this changed the rest of his life story and left a legacy for those that are willing to take the time to research his legacy, have left a great legacy. His life, that is the life of Thomas, teaches us that doubt is not the end of real faith, but often it's just the beginning. And you may have doubts in your life, but never doubt your life in the hands of a trustworthy God. That's the whole idea. See, Thomas trusted Christ enough to die for him. The question we have to answer is, do you trust Christ enough in the challenges of day-to-day life to live for him? See, most Christians, we have this problem that when challenges come or we're challenged by the culture around us, we back down. We back down because we're not sure that we really believe who Jesus is. And if there was ever a label of doubt, it probably isn't the one rightly deserved to go to Thomas. It more so goes to Christians who don't live as if Christ really did rise from the dead. I think one of the issues, and with this I'll finish up and leave on a more positive note, I guess. The idea that we want to get across today is to step towards your destiny. The destiny, the story that you're trying to tell, the story of your life for Christ, you might have to step away from your security. That is the honest truth. And that's one of the reasons why so many of us, we don't use the challenges of life to write a good story for Jesus. We let the challenges of our life overcome us because we're overcome with security. Our comfort is what we're trusting in more so. You know, all the great people of the Bible had to leave comfortable positions and trust God. They had to leave their security to embrace the destiny or the story that they were trying to tell. To step toward your destiny, you might have to step away from your security. You might have to step away from the comfort of finances. You might have to step away from the comfort of having good friends at the expense of being a witness for Jesus Christ. See, it's easy to blend in to this world. What Jesus asks us to do is use the challenges of our life and respond to them correctly. So we'll write a story that is really not our story. It's still the story of God. You see, all three of these things that we've talked about in the last couple of episodes, the fact that our friends determine our future, the fact that the choices we make today determine the stories we'll tell tomorrow, and the fact that how we respond to the challenges determines the story we'll tell one day. All three of those things really aren't about the story that we're writing for ourselves. It's a bigger picture of God's story, history. History is simply His story being told. Are you doing a good job telling it? Or are you wasting all your time worrying about how you can have a good time, how you can fit into culture, how you can be non-offensive to people and just sort of get by, how you can live the great life? I'm afraid that the people that live the greatest lives here on earth, at least according to secular standards, they're going to have a sorry end of life when they have to stand before God and give an account of the things they did by looking at their story of their lives. Does your story reflect God's story? I would encourage you, maybe as you face the challenges, even of COVID, there are people I know in our church that are facing things like cancer and other things, bereavement, lost loved ones. There are other situations where people have lost jobs. I would encourage you to embrace these challenges and respond to them, because how you respond to them really is writing a story of your life.